Welcome to the Speak with People podcast. My name is Jason Raitz. I'll be your host, and this podcast exists to help you improve your communication skills. Whether you communicate one-on-one, to a team, from a stage, or from behind a screen, we know that when we improve our communication skills as leaders, it exponentially changes everything. It improves our relationships, it improves our leadership skills, and it improves our business skills. So let's get ready to dive into this next episode. Well, how crucial are listening skills for leaders in 2024? Is listening even on your radar? Is it something that you're investing in, thinking about? Well, I hope so, because we're diving into that today on this episode on the Speak with People podcast. When you improve your listening skills, not only will you see success with your clients, but you will see success in your relationships, because listening is just critical. Well, I'm so excited to interview Rob Miles. He is a part of Truist Wealth, and we're going to explore how these listening skills can actually elevate your client relationships and your relationships in general. Rob, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and welcome.
Oh, Jason, thanks for the invite. Glad to be here and looking forward to sharing some thoughts here today.
Absolutely. Well, hey, before we jump in, why don't you give our listeners just a little bit of a background into your story, who you are, what you do, kind of what's brought you to this point.
Yeah, well, thanks. Appreciate it. I think it's always important to know people's background, right? So for me, big Italian Catholic family, the last of 7 kids, so many cousins you can't count. I don't even know how many there are, to be honest with you. So my point of that is there was never a dull moment growing up, right?
Yes.
There's always people coming and going, talking and yelling and screaming. And until this day, I eat fast and talk fast. And that was kind of the nature of a big family. And growing up, I also played lots of sports, so constantly on the move. And I've sort of repeated that chaos in my own life. So got my beautiful wife, Jill, and 4 children here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we, again, have created a really crazy, fast-moving household, lots of things going on. Professionally, I've done a lot of different things, like I'm sure a lot of your listeners. I've done everything from early webcast, internet development in the 90s. I've managed money along the way. And I found my way to where I am today in the last 15 years or so of my career around communication, coaching our advisors, and really the art of listening, the art of building better relationships. And so that to me is the essence of my day-to-day. And I would sort of share with folks, if you think about it, all the great companies that many of us work with day-to-day or use for families. You think of like Trader Joe's, you think of, the Costco's of the world, you think from a medical perspective, a Mayo Clinic, even from a luxury vacation at the Ritz-Carlton. All these great American companies are based on client experience. And at the end of the day, to me, that's communication, that's building relationships, that's building trust. And I think that's what we're going to sort of focus on today.
Wow. I love that. So what number are you in the siblings from 1 to 7?
Well, I'm the last.
Oh, that's right. You said that. Yes.
Yeah, that's the best part. And if my siblings are listening, they always know that means that the tallest, the best looking, all that kind of stuff. So
yes.
No, I was the last, also known as a little bit of a joker, as you can tell, but that made for lots of people around me, their friends, everyone always coming and going. So getting to be around lots of people was always fun for me.
Absolutely. Well, what inspired you? I mean, your career, thank you for the kind of dive into that. You've had, different taste in different sectors and success in different areas, through all of that, in the conversations you and I have had. I love your passion for communication and listening. Where did that come from? What inspired that?
Yeah, I think like a lot of folks, it's kind of accidental, right? And it's sort of built into me. So in 2010, as part of a prior firm, I was part of some really cool work around what are the preferences for individuals that want to work with a financial company or financial advisor or financial professionals. What is the client preference, if you will? So that really got us diving into things like emotion and fear, and do they want to be a participatory part of the process? Do they want to sort of delegate it off, whatever that may be? And it showed me that, there's not one way to do things. And so that really started this sort of journey for me. And that evolved into my roles at my prior firm and here at Truist Wealth around working with advisors to be better at what they do and helping them figure out the right way and strategic ways to build enduring and fulfilling relationships with clients and the skills necessary to do that. And for me, when I joined Truist Wealth, one of the ways I tried to simplify that, I sort of asked myself this question, like, how do you simplify all of this? And the simplest way to do that is in one word, which is listening, which we're going to talk about today. more broadly for our firm, we talk about using listening and leading with listening to develop what we call a purpose-driven wealth experience for our clients. And when we sort of think about that, it's this credo, which the prior company that I was mentioning, Jason, they probably do this really well as well, which is how do you see the world through the eyes of your client? And within the perspective of a wealth management for us, it's a lot about hearing their story and wanting what their story should be. If you're thinking about, a Trader Joe's, they know grocery shopping ain't so fun, so they've made it fun, and they've made their employees be super happy, super go lucky, stop what they're doing to take you to things. And so it's similar to that in terms of building a deep relationship with your customer or client, depending on the business that you're in.
Absolutely. Do you think, communication, what's interesting about it for me sometimes is, especially as leaders, we just communicate all the time. And so I think we take it for granted because, like breathing, I do at least, every breath kind of for granted until I have some type of an infection or something going on. And then I'm getting into the doctors and figuring it out. Why do you think more leaders, more professionals, from what I found, maybe your experience is different, but we have that same approach instead of being more proactive to improve these communication skills, these listening skills, so they'll help improve our client skills, our business. We wait till maybe things are, not right. What would help us get to that place where we're, being more proactive with those listening skills?
Well, it's a great question and thought. I mean, what I've done in my programs over the years is ask this question: in your 40-hour work week, what percent of time are you spending on what some people might refer to as soft skills or communication delivery skills
Yep.
versus whatever business you're in, technical skill? And as you can imagine, most professionals, when they ask that first question, how much time is dedicated to working on that, the answer is usually zero. And
Wow.
so is this an
Yeah.
acknowledgement, right, of that this is an important part of the experience and my skill set, and I need to work at it, and it has a value to me to do so. And so I think for a lot of us, it's the dangers of assumptions, is a term I like to use. In this case, the assumption as a professional or a leader that you don't need to think through this, you don't need to work on this. There's just a natural innate thing, you have it or you don't, which I think is not true. Like all skills, they can be worked on. So I think the first step is an acknowledgement, and then having meaningful uh, either strategies or trainings to sort of see the progress that you're making. And
Yep.
so once you can improve your progress, either as a leader, as an advisor, as a salesperson, whatever that, a doctor, and you see positive outcomes, you should get the momentum and the energy to keep doing it and keep learning and keep pushing and keep acknowledging that there's always better ways to do things.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that. I love that. So when it comes to our listening skills, as you teach and train your team, are there key areas that you guys hone in on to make sure they understand the importance, the depth, and kind of those, the practical components of the listening skills?
Well, first of all, we lay out the why from a business perspective in terms of what our clients are looking for and why it's so important that we hear their story.
Yes.
But I think for our listeners, regardless of the business that you're in, the way I might frame it to folks is, are you a speaker or are you a facilitator? So
Mm.
with our folks, I ask, like, what does a facilitator mean? And we have them go through that. It means that you ask great open-ended questions. It means that you are managing the narrative of a story or the person that's talking. It means that you are good at not going into those rabbit holes and you're able to pull it back and make the conversation more meaningful. If there's multiple parties participating, you're really good and skilled at bringing different viewpoints in and making sure no one is left out of that conversation so you could hear their
Wow.
point of view.
Yes.
And so framing it up as what I refer to as being a behaviorist, if you will, is from an arts business, it sort of changes the thought process around I'm not here to speak or to always speak the whole time. I'm here to engage and to be in a listening mode. And then we teach strategies and tools to do that, as opposed to, I think, mistakes some people might make is if I'm just a better listener, I'll have better conversations. Yes, to a point, but you have to have a framework, a strategy, an approach that you can refine and improve. And in the right situations, like we believe, certain tools we can provide our advisors that help engage in that conversation and create a more consistent and impactful listening experience for the person that's being discussed with, if you will. In this case, a client.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I heard you speak recently on a podcast and you talked about listening skills, and especially, in your field, you talked about just the privilege it is to be able to sit down and how you get to help, people succeed, you hit their goals, their dreams. I mean, and what an honor that is. I loved that perspective, because so often I think there are so many, and maybe even some of us have been guilty of it who are listening, but we just get in this rut of we're working, 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 working. We've got to hit our goals, hit our goals. And I just loved how you kind of took people back to the beginning and said, you got to remember, like, this is sacred work that we get to do. And listening is a huge part of that. Do you find that with, especially some of your more veteran advisors, that they get that, or does it take time to develop?
Well, I think it's interesting. I got a lot of feedback on this, and a positive one, just like you shared. And for our listeners, what I refer to is with our teams, and I think about this industry, it's the nobility of the business.
Mm,
It's a noble profession.
yes.
Every day, our teams here and across our industry, hopefully, are working to improve the lives of the families that we are privileged to serve. Whether Jason, if it was you, your family, and I know you have a 19-year-old son, and what are you looking with your business? And if we give you best in class advice, we're going to alter the success arc forever. And that's an important thing to acknowledge.
Absolutely. Oh, I
And
love
so
that.
I think we just have to stop sometimes and talk more about the nobility of this business. And for our listeners, depending on the career they're in, they may be in the medical profession, they may be a pilot, they may be building people's homes. Who knows? Whatever their profession is, you got to find the nobility in it and the impact it has on people. So for our business, though, we believe it's extremely noble. We compare it a lot to the healthcare business, if you will, and I like to think of it as if you can have great personal physical health and have phenomenal financial health. Well, those are two indicators of a very a well lived life, if you will, and a very hopefully happy and productive life at that.
Oh, wow. Absolutely. Because mo- it seems like most stress in life comes from financial pressure and stress. And if that's removed, whoo, wow, I can breathe now and I can live life to the fullest.
Yeah. If my four kids are listening, once they all leave college, that will be me and my wife Jill. So yeah, we'll get there.
Absolutely. Well, walk us into, let's just walk into a client meeting. So I'm sitting down with a brand new person, and what are some of the things that I need to think through as I'm about to go into this conversation, especially when it involves listening and getting to the heart of their story, because I love how you bring up story and how important that is.
Yeah. Well, I think I sort of misframe it this way. Sort of think of a situation maybe everyone got their hands around. First of all, you as in this case, an advisor in our experience, as a listener, you need to be committed to that cause. And you also need to know that if you know more, you can do more.
Wow.
But you also have to make the assumption that you don't know anything yet, or you don't maybe know what's most important. So that's the first the mindset. And then we talk about creating a listening experience. And so but before we get into the detail of that, I mean, from an example perspective, we all know friends, or maybe it's us, about to retire, a couple about to retire, been working their whole lives. And this is a friend of mine that I'm talking about. And they asked me to come over, and they were going to go with this financial firm, and they asked me some questions. And I just simply said, well, what did you talk about with them? And this couple just basically shared that all the greatness of those people that they met with, and they were in the business this long, and they were going to charge this much, and they had this experience and this investment philosophy, and that they could be trusted. And that's nice, but I said to them, I think that's the wrong questions. That's the wrong dialogue. And they said, well, what do you mean? And so I brought them over to their kitchen table, and here at Truist Wealth, we've developed what we call listening cards, which have a set of issues of wealth that families might deal with, from estate planning to educational funding to transitioning or owning a business to dreams and visions. And there's a series of these cards. And I said, let's just explore like what, and walk them through an exercise that we teach around what's most important, what's in the middle, what may be a longer term, what do you think? One spouse, what do you think the other? We create a dialogue. And that energy, you start to learn so much about this family that the other firm in this case did not. And things like what their travel plans look like, how many times they want to travel, what do they think about their only child, and what are they going to do with the wealth if it's passed to him or her. And the sort of the depthness of their anxiety around finances. And back to listening, as you and I have talked about, Jason, is the questions, right? So if you say you have anxiety in this case, well, why? Tell me more about that.
Wow.
And it ends up being that their friends have made financial mistakes or had not received great financial maybe advice, and therefore had to make decisions which were financially harmful to their own retirement. So they're watching this, right? And so you put that all together, we landed a very different approach, a very different understanding. And of course, as you can see where the story is going, we can give better advice when that we know this information. And that's what we're encouraging our teams to do. But within this industry, we just believe that leading with listening is the key to serving our clients in that noble way that we just talked about.
Wow. Leading with listening. I mean, that is powerful. Imagine, I mean, I don't know what the exact number is. I've read it a million times, but how many employees leave their company? And it's typically not because they have a dislike for their company or all that, but maybe there's some issues or, struggles they have with their immediate supervisor. And the one that comes up so much is listening. But imagine how things would change in our organizations if we led with listening. There's an old percentage out there. Some people say, sometimes it's 70-30, sometimes it's 80-20. Do you agree with that? 20% of the time you're doing what you talked about, getting that, the story and all of those kind of things. And then the large amount of time listening. Would you put a different number in those two spots, or would you agree in there?
Studies I've read are similar, but before I do that, to your point on leading with listening, a good colleague of mine here at Truist Wealth, Craig Cassio, our head of planning, is the one who coined that phrase through our discussions. And Craig and I have talked to depth about how different that is to lead with listening in our industry. And to your other point, I think you were tying it to like employees with leaders, correct?
Yes. Yes.
I think same thing, right? If you're a leader, are you listening to the people on your team? Do you understand what their hopes and dreams are? Do you understand what their challenges are? And I think there's stats on there. People leave the manager, not the job, right?
Right.
And I can 1000% agree with that in my own experience going forward. So, as for your question around, I'm now blanking on your question. So what was the question?
Yeah. So when it comes to the percentages,
Oh yeah,
what?
sorry, yeah, 70-28. Yeah, the data there is similar to what you said. And what I do, again, data's data. But what I've done in rooms of folks is how start shouting out the percentage of time you're talking in the meetings that you run,
Yep.
and in terms of client meetings. And people will just say 60, 70, 80, et cetera. And there is research that says even when someone says lower number, they actually talk more than they admit, or they think, maybe I should say, or they realize. But so I said, what if we flip that? And our perspective is that listening is so important that if we can have our clients speaking 70 to 80% of the time in certain situations, how much more would we know about them?
Right.
Or said differently, the best way to serve a client and the best way to understand what's the most important to them and the best way to give them the most noble of advice cannot be us speaking 80 to 90% of the time. We just, we kind of refuse to believe that to be the winning strategy. And so
Right.
we've sort of backed away from the table and said, what if we created a more unique and client-driven strategy, which is where the listening strategy that I referenced is sort of birthed out of, if you will.
Well, I love that. That goes back to what you said earlier about are you a speaker or facilitator? Because so often we sit with a client and we just want to rattle off what they need and instead of listening so we can be able to take our products and services and present them, a better holistic plan to be able to do that. And just, the changes that would happen if we did that. I mean, you think about it in our client relationships, but even in our own relationships, if
Yeah,
we,
sure. I mean,
yeah,
there's
I
probably
love that.
someone out there that's coaching youth sports, correct? Right. And so if you're coaching youth sports, how do you know what all the kids on the team are feeling and saying? Have you listened to what they're trying to accomplish with, what their fears are? So, one thing I'd point out, Jason, too, as you were saying that is, um, one of the reasons listening is so hard is it takes courage.
Ooh.
And what I mean by that is you have to go into a conversation where you don't know where it's going. You don't know what the story will be. You don't know the tougher topics that may come up depending on the situation. So in a wealth management perspective, it may become very personal. It may become very emotional. And
Right.
I believe that that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think related to that, and I know you've studied this as we talked about it, you think about precision listening or active listening. I know you speak to this topic as well. Listening is an active skill. You have to demonstrate that you're listening, either through the experience you create, the tools you use that I referenced earlier, or certain skills that, people like Charles Duhigg on super communicators talks about. I've talked to a professor at Stanford named Jamil Zeki who talks about this from a precision listening is what he calls it. And there's a sort of concept out there that if you want to talk a little more about, we can, called looping for understanding. So it's not just, you just can't say, I'm going to listen. You actually have to build the skill set and build the tools and think about better
Yep.
ways to do that, that show the person you're listening and actually make sure that you take what they're saying and you evolve the conversation based on that. To my point, listening conversations take a lot of courage because you don't control the agenda. The other person does.
Wow. Wow. That is, that's powerful. It speaks to, so I think so many of us sometimes get into the rut where we approach these client relationships and maybe we haven't taken the time to prepare for them. And it really speaks to like, we've got to spend time preparing so we have the right questions to ask. So then we can listen and to the responses and then, be able to remember, pieces of their story. How important is that preparation process? How do you walk your team through, preparing for those client relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think in any sort of client service or any project oriented situation, right? What we talk about is the importance of what we refer to as a pre-call. Um,
Yeah.
and whether you're flying a plane or whether you're having a client meeting, getting prepped is important.
Yeah.
So it's really making sure everyone understands their roles and responsibilities in the meeting, making sure what the objective of the meeting is. We go over things like back to communication skill, like who's going to introduce who, what are they going to say about who. But at the highest level, to your point, just having a pre-call preparation of what is the objective and how are we going to be successful in serving this client or prospect in this situation, who's going to the meeting, who's leading the meeting, what's the primary objective, all those kinds of things. And I think that they're in our sort of TikTok world we're all running by the seat of our pants, right? We're in a
Right.
fast-paced world. Sometimes there's, I don't think, an intended activity here. It's just we sometimes by default sometimes are winging it based on our own skill sets,
Yep.
right? And just like you would not want to go into a surgery and a doctor show up and say, "Who's here today?" And you're hoping that he or she has
Right.
looked at the films, I've looked at your blood type, has talked to the anesthesiologist. You expect these things to happen in the same way you expect a pilot to walk the plane, go through a pre-flight checklist, all those things as that they take this plane into the air. Depending on the business you're in, it might not be as dramatic as that, but it's the same, I think, processes and preparation skills that will make you better at what you do.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and especially as you're listening and you're hearing those stories, seems like empathy is a pretty important part of the formula for listening. Talk to us a little bit about, empathy. Is empathy available to every, leader, professional? Is it something that we've got to step into? How important is it to the listening process?
I'm just obviously critical. I actually love your opinion on this one. After I share mine, is sometimes empathy can be confused by people. Just feeling sorry for someone isn't empathy.
Yeah.
Empathy is really living in their shoes, understanding what they're going through, and appreciating that, and those kinds of things. And so, I think similar to listening, empathy is probably as part of that, emotional connection sort of skill set is, and I'll use the word authentic.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Authentic empathy is different than I'm going to show empathy, right? Authentic empathy. And there's another skill here again in and I think you and I talked about this. Have you read Super Communicators yet by Charles
Oh,
Duhigg?
yeah.
Have you
Oh,
read
yeah.
that? And he talks
Definitely.
a lot about this, which is mirroring.
Yes.
And if I am mirroring your emotions, studies will show we're going to have a better relationship. And also, if I exchange vulnerability, and that's
Yes.
something that's really hard for people as well. So
Yes.
if you share with me something about a health issue within your family, and I say back, well, I appreciate you sharing that with me. My family's had a similar one to that, and I've lived that experience. And so I'm feeling the pain that you're going through, and I would love to talk a little more about that. I've created not only empathy, but I've shared my own story, and I've shared to you that we can be vulnerable and have a more meaningful relationship going forward. And
Yes.
I think, and again, for those who are interested, the Duhigg book dives into this, and it's just fascinating.
Oh,
But again, back to depending on the relationship, some industries, some people are afraid to show that vulnerability. And I would
right.
just propose that in our industry and many others, that is a winning approach if you define winning as helping the people that you're serving, right? And
Yeah.
developing a deeper and more meaningful relationship. So there's, again, some more skills people can think about as they go into whatever, again, whether it's a client relationship, an employee relationship, a family relationship, or they're trying to restore a relationship.
Right.
These are skills that can serve you well.
Right. Well, two things. I mean, Charles Duhigg, new book, Super Communicators. Oh my goodness. Like every page, I
Yeah.
was like, yes, wow, yes,
Crazy.
wow.
I've read it twice already, to be honest with you. I've read it twice. Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Right.
Well, and then two, we live in a day and age where people are bombarded all of the time, all the time. And so every industry, there's a million different options for them. And the skills that you're walking us through and the tools you're giving us right now, this will set you apart because especially the older generations, and to some extent, as I look at the research from, millennials on up, we want that personal connection because we're so bombarded with technology all the time. These are skills that are so needed in 2024.
I mean, this our kids are growing up in a different world, right? And
Yeah.
so it is a busier world. It's a TikTok world. It's people don't like spend time with each other, and so when you can have certain skills like listening and stick out from the crowd, you're going to be more meaningful and successful. And I think that it's a kind of a lost art now, right? And so, no example of that would be, Jason, when was the last time you walked out to your mailbox and you got a meaningful, personal note?
Right.
I
Right.
mean, for most people, they're like, what are you talking about? That doesn't
Right.
happen anymore. And so for those that are trying to create relationships, you know, that's another type of approach you can take. Like, can you do something like that surprises someone in an age where it's not normal? And
Right.
so I think in our industry, having and slowing down to move faster, right? Taking someone and saying, hey, for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to go through an experience that will allow you to tell your story about where you've been, where you are, but most importantly, where you may want to go and the types of things you're thinking about. And that's going to allow us to really understand your story at a deeper level. So in turn, we may be able to offer better or more integrated advice or get the right teammates involved to give you that.
Yep.
That's a compelling opportunity to the person listening to you
Yep.
that you in turn are going to listen to back. And so that's something that I think, again, in our world, super fast world, slowing down to be more effective and faster is a proposition people would enjoy hearing.
Well, and it's beautiful. I was just listening to Donald Miller's podcast, Business Made Simple. He was interviewing Will Guidara, who wrote another tremendous book, Unreasonable Hospitality. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. He uh, was awarded the #1 restaurant in the world in New York City. And so he just talks about these amazing hospitality stories, but he talks about how you got to find as many touch points as possible to serve people and elevate their experience because those kind of things just set you apart. And you don't do it to get the business or, for the get part, but it's truly that servant leadership. And then that trust is built with the client. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute. Cause I've been on the other end. I just before you and I started our interview podcast, I interviewed someone who's in the grief world, and we're talking about how do you communicate with people when they're grieving and if you're grieving, and we all say the wrong things, and all those different kind of things, but to be able to have the right tools in our toolbox to be able to say and to be able to bring and have those touch points, because then the trust is built and people believe you're for them. I mean, it's just so powerful.
Well, I think, the grief business, right? Regardless of the business you're in, the skills that you are developing, they get easier as you keep going.
Yes.
So, like many things, it's just getting going. And so, with the advisors I'm working with, they're invariably like, "Oh, I did it 2 or 3 times, Robin. Wow, this is a lot easier than I thought it would be. It's actually more enjoyable than I thought it would be." Or, "Wow, even in regular conversation, not even the experience that I create, like in a formal setting, in a lunch meeting, I'm being a better listener and I'm using certain skill sets and I'm being more facilitator and I'm asking better open-ended questions." So I think just sometimes there's some quote, right? The first step's the hardest step or something.
Right.
And so getting started and taking the second and third step, invariably the momentum will grow, regardless of the business or the objective that you have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What some advice would you give to leaders who are looking at going, okay, I've got I've got to really work on these skills. I've got to dive into them. I love that kind of chunk of wisdom you just give us, kind of just start. What are some steps you would say, hey, if you want to start going down this road to really improve these skills?
First of all, do some of read some of the books we mentioned, right? Do some of the
Yep.
research. But I think through framing the why, right? Why do you want to do that?
Yeah.
What are you trying to accomplish? What is your goal? And being brutally honest with where you are and getting some feedback from folks. And then
Yes.
it's going forward. I mean, you got to tie it to your personal situation and what you're trying to accomplish and where are you on the spectrum, if you will, in terms of the feedback you might get. So, I'd encourage people to think through that. There's a lot of great resources out there. And then, going to some people and asking them like how have you been doing? So in a leadership setting, let's coach the coach here. Like, how am I doing? What can I do for you? What can we do better? Um, and then the second thing I would say, that we sometimes start with, and I know you're familiar with this because you've had a podcast on this, which is DISC. And so
Mm.
the DISC model is a great approach of how to be self-aware. So there's lots of different approaches out there. We use here at Truist Wealth as well. We use DISC. And what I talk with the advisor about is understanding yourself and how you communicate and how you come across. If you're not familiar with that model, the highest level, there's dominance, there's influence, there's steadiness, there's compliance. And the mixture of those make up the way we all are received. And so that might be a sort of assessment way to do it, because then you understand yourself and then you're able to better understand others. And so similar to the preference work I started about earlier in a financial services mindset, this is understanding the way people prefer to be communicated with, what encourages them to develop a relationship, what pushes them away, how to give certain people space and time, how to push certain other people.
Yep.
So I would encourage people to think of tools and assessments that are out there to help you make the journey.
Wow. Wow, that's so powerful. One great question I heard, I can't remember who said it. I'll remember it after we're done. But they said, ask the people closest to you, because, yeah, I think sometimes when you're like, yeah, do some self-evaluation. And I think for the most part, some of us are like, yeah, okay, I'm a pretty good listener. Well, then go ask your spouse or partner or, one of your kids or a coworker or boss, and then ask the question, what's it like on the other side of me? Ooh, okay. Like, no, tell me, and then be open with that feedback. It's just, like you said, it's just so powerful to be able to go, oh, okay, that's what it's like.
Yeah, I mean, understand. That's good advice, Jason. I can't disagree with that at all.
Absolutely. Hey, as we close the conversation, is there any lasting, something that you've learned, over, your journey of diving into this focus on listening, that you would say, hey, if you're a leader, you have influence in people's lives, this is, I mean, we've gone through so much gold, but if there's anything else in the toolbox that you're like, make sure you hit on this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, God, how long do you have, right? Uh,
Right.
you know, I, I think just this realization that um, this is the skill sets of the future.
Mm.
Meaning they're really important right now, but in a world that we're living in, the CEO of NVIDIA was talking about this. Everyone wants to learn code. Well, as AI develops, it's going to be much more about how you use that and how you develop relationships and how you can encourage people to do things. So I think as we go forward the next 5 or 10 years, depending on your industry, I don't believe the emotional connection, the EQ, the communication train, whatever you want to call it, is going to stop. It's not
Mm.
going to go, oh, you know what? Let's go backwards.
Right.
Let's not do this anymore. Right? It's only going to gain momentum, and regardless of the industry, all kinds of research, the ability to communicate, the ability to develop deep relationships, the ability to motivate and lead people will be based on some of the skills we talked about today.
Yep.
So, it's not going to happen overnight for anyone listening. It's kind of like golf. It never ends. You can never stop getting better at it.
Yes.
And it's difficult. You're going to have setbacks, but I think, committing to the fact that these are skills of yourself as a leader or advisor or whatever you are, doctor, whatever. And as a individual, these skills will become only more important as the years go by, not less important.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I love that. Before I let you go, let me ask you just a couple of quick rapid fire questions. Is there a
Sure.
speaker that, boy, every time you hear them, they challenge you, they fill up your bucket, you just,
Yeah.
you can't wait to the next time you get to hear them?
Well, I listen to a lot and watch a lot, so there's a lot of those folks. But when I think of some of the work here that's inspired me, it's Simon Sinek.
Mm,
And so many people have watched his Start With Why podcast or his speech, TED Talk. One of his new books, The Infinite Game, is just phenomenal. What I love about the way he shares things is storytelling, which you see
yes.
I've tried to do as much as I can today
Yes.
and relate to the people that I'm talking to. But if you think of Start With Why, it's the golden circle. Why, how, what. I mean, I remember that from the moment he said it. And
Yep.
so I just think frameworks and leading with listening was an example of that. And the power of listening is something we've talked about. So no, I think if you're sitting around there and you want to watch a great YouTube video or whatever, and you sort of type Simon Sinek into the search bar, you'll get some really cool interviews and speeches that will give you some really good ideas that you would activate on immediately. And
I
that's
love that.
that's so cool about what he does.
Absolutely. Is there a podcast that you keep going back to that's either guilty pleasure or it's a development one where you're like, whew, this one, I love it.
Well, I'm not going to go be pleasure, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about our own podcast. Oscar Elder, our co-chief investment officer from Truist Wealth, she has a podcast that she leads called I've Been Meaning to Do That. And what I
Oh,
love about that is that it sort of speaks to our clients and the people we're trying to serve, because all of us use those terms. I've been meaning to do that. I've been meaning to update my will. I've been meaning to figure out who's going to take care of my
absolutely.
kids. I've been meaning to get life insurance. I've been meaning to review my sort of retirement plan. So that's a great podcast on the Truist Wealth side. On a personal level, I'm not sure if you've listened to How I Built That. Have you heard that?
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
yeah, I just love that. You hear the stories of people who built great companies, from Zappos to all the different companies they go through. And the theme I always find, like with Lululemon and others, is the amount of failure that these people had, and
Right.
that none of them should have succeeded. Most people
Right.
doing what they did would have failed.
Yeah.
And so I just find those to be inspirational as well as interesting, especially for the brands that many of us love and you see every day out there. And there's some really interesting people that do amazing things. And it's just a very practical podcast and very easy to listen to.
Love that. And then lastly, is there a book you're like, if you don't read any other book, you need to read this book?
Well, I already mentioned Super Communicators by
Yes.
Charles Duhigg, and I think that's just phenomenal. As again, pretty read a lot of different types of books. I think the one I would think about, given what we're talking about here, is The Power of Positive Leadership by John Gordon. John Gordon, many people might know, it's lots of different books, The Carpenter, The Power of the Positive Team, etc. But this power of positive leadership, from the discussion we're having, is that I believe in that. I ascribe to that. I try to be as positive leader as I can. I think that positivity wins the day. And I think, as John talks about, that's not Pollyannish. That's just being positive, even in the face of challenge.
Yes.
So for those that are leading teams, do that. If you like that book, another book that I've loved and used with my own team is called Row the Boat by John Gordon. And so, and PJ Fleck, who's a football coach. But Row the Boat concept is simple. Are we rowing the boat together? And are we on the same team?
Wow.
And there's a great movie out now called Boys in the Boat, which is not related to that, but it's similar in the sense of the team overperforms based on their ability to work together. And I think that what I like to talk about my team is just keep rowing the boat. So good days, row the boat. Every day, row the boat. The best days, row the boat. Just keep rowing the boat. Keep making progress. Keep believing what we're doing. And so the journey we're on here at Truist Wealth with listening and our purpose-driven wealth experience, that's what we're doing here. Just keep rowing the boat.
Yep.
So again, these are, as you'll see, Jason, you and I talked about, all from Simon to some of these books I'm talking about, they're quite straightforward. They're quite practical. And that's what I enjoy doing. I like to read practical stories, practical skills that I can immediately impact my own life and own business by putting to work.
Oh, I love that. Powerful stuff. Rob, this has truly been amazing. I've filled up 2 pages of notes. I know this is going to help so many of our listeners. Where can we send people online to connect with you or find out more about you?
Yeah, if you're interested in connect with me on LinkedIn, you can look my profile up there, and I'm happy to connect with folks. And I try to post there as consistently as I can, and sort of as I share some thoughts and stories from my travels. But that would be the best way to do it, Jason.
Wonderful. We'll put that in the show notes and in the Speak with People community group. And Rob, I can't thank you enough for your time. Thanks for being on the podcast.
I appreciate the invitation, Jason, and it's good to be spent some time with you. Have a great day.
Well, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Speak with People podcast. We hope that you were encouraged. We hope that you were inspired and challenged to improve your communication skills. I want to thank you again for being a part of the Speak with People podcast community. Make sure you don't miss out on being a part of the Speak with People Facebook community group. Just head to Facebook, type in Speak with People, scroll down and join our community, because every single day we're encouraging each other, we're helping each other to improve our communication skills. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode.